Hello. So I welcome you to my TED Talk. The title of this presentation is Evaluating Instructional Practices and Outcomes, a Leader's Approach to Continuous Improvement. And so I would be actually giving this presentation to teachers, to our teachers. So coming back from summer break, one of the things that we absolutely want to do together is to establish some goals. And through this presentation, we will be looking at some data that will help us actually outline what some of those goals and baselines will be, what we will be doing in order to be able to meet those goals, and how are we going to evaluate our goals and the progress of our goals as we actually through the trajectory of the school course. So, different roles in a school district are usually hyper focused and making gains after data has been shared across numerous stakeholders. And any sort of area where one is focusing on growth, there has to be data of some kind that will help us to understand what our base point is and also what those areas of improvement are. I found this very important um, source. It says that by providing strategic direction, and I think that's probably the most important part, we don't want to just set any type of direction, but rather a very strategic and a very specific direction. Fostering a positive school culture and implementing instructional best practices, us as educational leaders will create an environment that nurtures learning, that supports student achievement, and enhances overall educational quality. And so I think those are very, very important to look at. As a former director looking at high school TELPAS scores for our emergent bilingual students, we saw that they had not been able to meet the state standard of 36% the previous year. Um, we had a high school campus in the district, just one, and it had performed at a 15% growth in language the previous year. At the elementary campuses, growth was evidenced, but at a much smaller scale. As instructional leaders, it's our responsibility to utilize current data to focus on an area to grow on and find the appropriate measures to make effective changes by providing strategic direction, as we've mentioned before, fostering that positive school culture, and implementing those best instructional practices. And I say that because going on into this school year, I say that I have that previous experience from that former district to kind of share with you and what we have been able to address, the plan that we were able to take, the trajectory that we went on, and the evaluation of our trajectory that actually helped us get that over 50% growth, um, the following year. And so when we're actually very strategic, when we have a set goal in mind, when we have our ways of how we are going to actually evaluate our process and our journey, that is a very indicative way of saying of showing that we can actually get results. Now, of course, I talk about the former high school, but now I think it's very most important to actually look at um, our data and understand our data, what we're basing all of our decisions on, which is much of the primary understanding the direction that we want to head towards. And so I'm going to click on this link right here, or on this picture right here with the lady with the data, and it's going to open up our information, the information regarding our campus. So here we are. We have a total amount of 2,164 students. That's our overall school population. And when we are looking specifically at immersion bilinguals, we have 612. And part of the enrollment process is, we wonder, well, if we have that many students, but our overall Hispanic population is much large, is a large population, you know, how do we know which students make up our English learners? And so I think it's very important to have just a basic knowledge of how the process works. So upon enrollment, parents have to complete the home language survey. That survey asks, not usually, it does ask two questions. What languages are spoken at home by the student, and what language is spoken at home, period. Anytime that there is a language that's not English by law, we have to actually assess the student in a linguistic test for identification purposes. And so if they have sufficient or above levels, state levels of English, then they do not qualify for services. And so the opposite, if they score below a certain level that the state requires, then they do qualify for services. Now, at the elementary level, parents have the options of choosing bilingual, or they have the option of ESL, or the third option is actually to deny all services. And even though they deny those services, they still have to meet these requirements to reclassify out of the program, which at our high school level, basically they have to score a composite in TELPAS and listening, speaking, reading, and writing, a composite score of advanced high, and then along with a passing uh, English star EOC score. And so that gives you an idea of what the beginning looks like when they are identifying, and what the actual requirements to reclassify out of that status looks like. So when we actually inherit our students, middle school inherits them first. And so they are actually dealing with technically three different types of instructional models, because you're having students who went through a type of elementary instructional model that could have been immersion. It could have been coming from a dual campus. It could also be students coming from a campus that's not so language focused, and it could be an early exit program, which most of our schools in our district operate with. We only have 5 dual language schools and one actual dual language, dual two-way instructional school. And so by the time they get to us, it's almost kind of like they're going through a funneling system at middle school level, because middle school is actually inheriting all of these students that have gone through different language models. And some kids are really high in English language, and some kids are still actually struggling. And that's despite them having just recently come into our country, regardless of those sort of things. And so I think that's really important to understand, because as educators, that impacts us. So out of all of our students, we have 439 students that selected Spanish on their home language survey, and then we have 173 students whose parents had selected English. That gives you an idea of what we inherit. Out of that 2,000 student population, that makes up 34. This group of students are English learners who have been properly identified, make up 34.7% of our school population. That's almost a 50% of our school population. In the previous year, not this last spring, but the spring before, the TELPAS reading scores are there. Advanced high is obviously the highest level that they can acquire, followed by advanced, then intermediate, and then beginning. TELPAS reading, you can actually see that the majority of our students are sitting at the intermediate level. In TELPAS writing, you can see that the larger number of students are actually captured in the intermediate level as well. So we're about an intermediate level reading and writing. Our recent immigrant population out of that 34.7% is actually not very high. So this is the long-term ELs. These are the kids who have now been here 3 years plus. Their language has still not developed, and therefore they are still not able to meet the requirements to actually reclassify out of that status. Telepath speaking, we're actually our largest numbers are looking at the beginning level. Telepath listening, our highest number is at an advanced. So there's obviously some sort of and disaggregating this data, there's a little bit of inconsistency. There's consistency with reading and writing, but not with speaking and listening. For the most part, when we typically see that sort of situation, sometimes there is issues with testing strategies. It might have actually the language sufficient, but they're not doing something right when they actually take the test, if you will. So we'll keep those sort of things in mind as we move along. Now, looking at their EOC scores, their STAR scores, their standardized scores, we have a very large selection of students that do not pass our Algebra 1 test. We have about 336 students that didn't pass and 385 that at least passed. We have 237 that met, which is your B, average is a B. And then your master's, which is about an A, we have 145 students. So we have a lot of numbers in the meets, which is great, and in master's, but we definitely need to look at those students that are not passing, what's going on. And then, of course, looking at reading EOC, English, or English 1 and English 2 tests, we have 351 students that did not pass, and then we have 317 that did, that have that C. And then in biology, biology is the only science test that students take in high school in order to graduate. We have 306 students that didn't pass, and we have 210 students that got approaches. So that gives you an idea of where our work is cut out for. Another thing to be mindful of is that when it comes to our bilingual programs, we have a bilingual program in Spanish because we have had 20 or more English learner students in the same grade level in the district who speak that language. But of course, that program is not offered at the secondary levels. And I bring that up because even though you might have never sat in a bilingual classroom before, there are two things that actually are very largely different from our traditional secondary classrooms. The first one that we have seen is overall when we actually compare the data from bilingual to monolingual test scores, is that our students in bilingual campuses will always outperform our monolingual students. And the number one reason why is because of the level of rigor and the high expectations that our teachers set for our students. The second part that makes a huge difference, obviously, with the bilingual classroom, you would expect that there would be a higher level of linguistic support in there. So teachers are most certainly utilizing teaching strategies to help students develop those language skills in both languages, which once you get to the secondary levels, it's like you go from a very high level of support in language, then all of a sudden in middle school, that same level of support just does not exist. And so our students will be rock stars at the elementary levels, and then they just fall. And even with them being here in the country for several years, they become what is known as long-term ELs, because it has taken them so long to reclassify. And sometimes they never make that reclassification. They never meet that reclassification criteria. And so that's definitely something to kind of keep in mind of, because what is it that now we can do in the high school, even though we're not going to operate as a bilingual classroom? What are some type of supports that you guys need in order for us to support this group of students? And in my former experience and what I have observed is that these type of strategies, it not only helps our English learners, because all of our students are English learners. All of our students need to increase their academic language. And so these strategies do not just help our English learners, they actually end up helping all of our students. And so the main question now is, where do we go from here and what can we do about it? What is going to be our game plan and what are we actually going to be focusing in on? And so, as a former director, I have specific recommendations for the campus principal and how my team and myself can assist. The biggest part of the plan is how can content teachers and elective teachers support each of these areas. Content language is still teaching a language that's specific to the content to the students. So, one of the recommendations is that as a campus, we will be focusing on implementing the 7 steps to a language rich classroom, beginning with training all of our teachers in these steps. We want to teach our students what to say when they don't know what to say. The second one is having students speak in complete sentences, which will also correlate and help with TELPAS. Randomizing and rotate when calling on students, so that way no students are left behind. Every single student is needs to show accountability and look for that support in the class. Use those total response signals. Have all students respond in nonverbal ways, to that way you can actually check for understanding and they can continue to be engaged in the class and actively participate in class. Utilize those visuals and vocabulary strategies that support your objectives, incorporating pictures, realia, anchor charts, word walls, making that content more accessible and more memorable. So that way it's not a sit and get. It's not a, hey, let's write down these definitions and have them memorized, but rather actually let it be more memorable. We want to have students participate in structured conversations, design partner or group discussions with clear prompts and roles, and expectations to promote the academic language and that academic talk. And then finally, have students read and write about the content and integrate reading and writing activities that are closely in line with your lesson objectives to deepen understanding and retention. And incorporating these steps will support our students in all the classrooms to seek that student achievement and growth. We will work with you and your PLCs to look deeper into the curriculum, what we are teaching in the classrooms, and how we can actually incorporate these steps in their daily activities. We don't want for this to just be another training, another shelf that goes into that book untouched, covered in dust by the end of the year or by the end of your educational career. We want to actually give you guys opportunities within PLCs to actually see and show you how to plan to utilize these activities in your classrooms, so that way they can go ahead and take effectiveness now. um so we want to be focused, we want to be consistent, and we would definitely want to be strategic in what we do. We will be sharing with you all beforehand after trainings what the walkthroughs will be focusing in on. So to begin with, we don't want to focus on all 7 steps. Hey, you by the first 6 weeks, you guys need to know or have addressed, all 7 steps. But rather, how about we just work on the first 3? We think that's doable. That's a little bit more easy to measure, and that way it gives us a chance to actually do some walkthrough, see it in action, see how our top teachers are utilizing these strategies in the classroom to give you some really great ideas. And then in other classrooms, we also want to help each other. We want to build each other up. We want to show how some things might have been improved on, how what a different strategy would have looked like, or how to tailor it differently to get the biggest bang for your buck type situation. And so again, we want to be measurable, we want to be focused, and we want to be specific and strategic. And more than anything, through these walkthroughs, we want to ensure that we're actually using these with fidelity. We want to make sure that we aren't just inviting another trainer into our district to, with a lot of money and not actually utilize it in our classrooms. And so we definitely want to be able to use these steps moving forward. And all just to help us improve our instruction. Our first place of reference is going to be the data that we previously looked at. We will be utilizing our standard scores from texasschools.gov that show our results and our EOCs. We will be using this data and actually diving deeper in PLCs with you to see what sort of questions were typically missed by our students. And this part is actually going to be really important because when we actually see this part and when in the program you're able to actually dissect it into who actually got these questions wrong, you'll actually start to make connections because it could be that it is our ELs that are getting these questions wrong. And from there, some of the questions that we might want to ask ourselves is, well, did the student understand it because they didn't understand the topic, the content? For example, did I not teach how to actually add correctly? What 1 + 1 is? Or is it that the student knows how to add, but they didn't know what the word add meant and what equals meant? That's language. And so that would be some sort of things to actually address and to clarify with our students moving forward, is seeing if it's content or if it's linguistic. If it is it that academic language that we need to work better in. So those are going to be very, very important pieces. And let's see. Because we also have to remember that we do have students who do not have the same life experiences as the rest of our students. So we definitely want to tackle those sort of things. When it comes to standardized questions, sometimes they ask questions that are very specific to the life here in our country, and we have students who haven't lived here for very long. And a question has to do something with an idiom. It's raining cats and dogs. Well, to a foreigner, that might sound weird. What do you mean it's raining cats and dogs? But rather for us, it's a figurative type of speech where we know that it's not literally, raining cats and dogs, but rather it has a complete different meaning. Benchmark assessments, we know that those are the smaller tests that the districts provide to assess our students in our curriculum. And so it will help us to utilize those benchmark assessments through the trajectory of the school year to see where our gains are as we are actually incorporating these 7 steps in our instructional practices. And that way we are able to see where we continue to, that would be our opportunities to actually find some of those trends. And that way we don't wait until the next year when the next set of EOC results come to see how we did, but rather we will use these benchmarks to observe how we currently performed. OHI is a diagnostic tool that we are very well aware of. OHI, it's that health survey to see the satisfaction of teachers and also see the satisfaction of our students in our classrooms. And sometimes those are sort of external factors that standardized tests technically a light capture, but you really aren't going to ever be able to be for sure. And so OHI is a perfect diagnostic tool that we're already incorporating, that we already have. It's something familiar, it's not something else that's new, but it's something that we actually already utilize to actually look at the health of our overall school. And so we want to actually diagnose our performances not just from standardized tests but from other factors. Are our students unhappy? Do they feel engaged? And I think that's very telling, even for me as a teacher, how my students feel, because if they're not feeling safe, how am I going to expect them to learn? If I'm not being really great at building those relationships with the students, maybe that's something that I'm going to ask for help on. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But we definitely want to know how we are feeling, and how our sense of belonging, on our campus. That is still very impactful to the scores that we see day in and day out. Furthermore, educational leadership influences the overall quality of learning experience for students. Effective leaders establish a positive and inclusive school climate where students feel valued, they feel safe, and they feel motivated to learn. So, by creating a culture that celebrates diversity, that fosters our student engagement, and promotes collaboration, educational leaders will enhance the overall educational experience that will lead to increased student satisfaction and a more meaningful and holistic learning journey for our students. So, we have talked about the 7 steps, and these are the actual 7 steps. We will What we will be doing is, after training, we'll be focusing on the first 3 steps during the first 9-week period. We want for teachers to have time to implement them in their lesson plans, like we have mentioned before. This won't start until after the first 6 weeks of school. We want for you guys to have time to get acclimated with your new group of students, get to learn their names, get to learn their strengths and weaknesses. Um, More than anything, just get to know them, period. And that way, we also want to give time to plan in our PLCs and collaborate with your peers. After that period of time, as a PLC group, it's groups of teachers with their PLCs, you guys are going to conduct walkthroughs on your own, in your own content of teachers, and provide feedback to each other during your PLCs. And so the purpose of that time is to allow yourselves to collaborate in a safe space, utilizing safe conversations with feedback on your observations to support each other on how to improve and grow. We want to establish and make sure that these are the type of conversations that are going to build you up. None of us are perfect. And I think one thing that's really important is for us to get comfortable in being uncomfortable in a safe space, because mistakes aren't is not are not a sign of weakness or failure, but rather a sign of growth, because you do not know what you do not know. And moving forward, in order for you to grow, you have to understand where those areas of growth lie. I remember my very first 2 years of teaching, my classroom management was the absolute worst. There was absolutely no great sense of learning going on, and it was very indicative in my evaluations with my admin. And obviously for them it wasn't surprising, because it was my first 2 years. I had never done student teaching. My degree had nothing to do, actually it had everything to do with the content that I was teaching, but it didn't have anything to do with education and teaching strategies or anything like that. And so, if I were to actually be brutally honest with you, it was not until my fifth year, at the end of my fifth year, when I finally felt I'm finally where I've been wanting to be. I have gotten my lesson plans done. I have gotten my structure done. My classroom management is on point. My gradual release is beautiful. My high academic questions are on point. It was not until the end of my fifth year where I felt like I was a master teacher. And sometimes I've seen it even as a director, in my former position as a director, when I got to walk in and do walkthroughs with teachers, I would see amazing things going on. And there would be a teacher who's in her first year teacher, and she was rocking it. Her benchmark scores, her unit scores were high. The students were doing absolutely really, really well. And she just came in and she just, she obviously outshone me in the level of years of experience that she had. For her, it took her a year, and for me, it took 5 years. And so there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, because we all develop at um, different rates. And so I want to um, make sure and ensure with everyone that we're going to grow in this together. Even as instructional leaders, we're going to grow with you, because we're going to learn what your needs of support are and how we need to actually help you as you help our students. And so do not think that we're just going to put this on your shoulders and we're going to expect for you to move forward, because we also carry a specific expectation of ourselves in order for you to be able to meet that same expectation. So, excuse me, we're definitely working with this together. So when we do come walk into your classroom, please know that we are doing it to help ourselves. We are doing it to see what it is that we can do to make the instructional experience of our students better. And none of us are perfect, but we are definitely want to be in the mindset of a growth mindset. So this part of the process is probably going to be the one of the most important ones, because we are going to feel reluctant, and it's okay. But know that we are helping each other. It's not admin against teachers. It's teachers helping teachers, and admin also supporting you through this piece. Curriculum fidelity is also something of importance. Sometimes, it might be that we're doing all the right things, but we just really don't have the right curriculum to do it with. And so, our district has adopted certain curriculum. We've been following it, and we want to ensure that we're following it with fidelity, which is why we're also using our observations as a moment to see if we're understanding what it is that we are supposed to be teaching. Do you have a clear sense of what you are supposed to be teaching in your classes? Because if not, then you've fallen in between the cracks, and that is our fault as admin, that we didn't ensure that you were prepared enough and understanding what you should be teaching throughout, on a daily basis. And so that is part of the reason why we're using those observational tools. We're reviewing lesson plans and student work, and to support you and support you through coaching. So it means more than anything honoring the framework that we're going to establish. And PLCs is when you will have the scheduled time to collaborate with one another. This is where we are ensuring that someone, as we've mentioned before, is not making the content accessible, meaning that kind of like the 1+1 situation that I mentioned before, we're making sure that we are making that content accessible and understandable to our students. versus seeing if it's the language that we actually need to help our students a little bit more. And so, but we're not going to be able to know those things unless we're actually very strategic. Remember, strategy is where we want to be. We want to be strategically focused on and being intentional with what we're actually reviewing in our PLCs. Each content area has a SILT leader who will ensure that you are provided and following your pacing guides, or unit guides as they are aligned with our state standards. If you have questions about that, any sort of questions will always be given to the SILT leaders, because the SILT leaders have scheduled time in their uh, on a daily basis to meet with the admin team, with the SILT team, and then also with the admin team. And so, best believe that your concerns, your questions, know that your SILT members are actually your advocates for your needs, that will be escalated through the hierarchy ladder. And so we want to make sure that we're addressing the skills that students need to be able to be successful in those benchmarks and those unit assessments, and then, of course, finally in those ELCs at the end of the year. The first set of scores that we have mentioned, we have finally received our spring EOC results from this last year. So we will be utilizing those with our benchmark scores in the fall with the first set to kind of see if we have gotten some growth. These scores will be detrimental to see what short-term goals we need to establish at the end of each 6-week period. Our unit tests for our non-content courses will also allow us to establish a baseline at the beginning of the year in correlation with some of the same spring test results. The OHI results are shared with teachers each winter, so we will also be utilizing those results in our PLCs once we have received them and administrative meetings. It's important, as we've mentioned before, that our students feel safe in order to build that confidence in their learning environment. Our observation notes, each of you will have a template of how to actually conduct a walkthrough and what you're actually going to be focusing in on, because again, everything's going to be done strategically and with intention. And those observation notes are going to be collected, and your SILT team members are going to take those observation notes. We're going to discuss them as an admin team, and then we're going to discuss some trends, and then we're going to return those observation notes back to you, let you guys collaborate, let you guys actually have the opportunity to kind of discuss and reflect and give feedback to each other and identify some trends yourself, and see if we're, as an admin team and as a teacher team in the PLCs, are we actually on the same page? So that way we continue to actually move on in the trajectory of the course, utilizing the same game plan. And so we're hoping that we'll be able to identify some of those same trends together and tackle and come up with a game plan to tackle those sort of trends. Through our observations, I think it's best to understand now that please feel free and open for your team members to come and take pictures of either samples of student work or of your classrooms. I feel like in the educational world, we are the best groups of people who do not mind sharing and copy and pasting, if anything else, because I don't know how many times I have actually utilized someone else's idea, and it has worked for my students sometimes, and sometimes it doesn't work for my students. And we know as educators that we do really, really well with sharing with one another. And so let's be open and create that safe space now that we can take pictures of students' work, so that way, if I had no idea that you were actually utilizing the strategy in your classroom, I would definitely want to actually learn more about it. Like, how do you make this happen with your students? What sort of routines and procedures have you established and put in place for your students to be able to actually be successful in this, because I think my students need that, and I think it's actually going to be beneficial with, the bigger picture that we're actually trying to focus on. And so we need to kind of establish that type of culture and that type of learning environment, not only to have our kids work together and learn together, but also teachers learning together and working together. And so part of our observations is also to collect those student work samples to help us with our reflection pieces and our PLCs. We have three different platforms. We've already talked about PLCs, but as a reminder, we have Elevation. We all have accessibility to Elevation. Elevation is very specific to your English learners. That's where you actually document your forms for recommendations for assessments, those linguistic levels of support that you want for your students to have in their standardized tests. And along with that, you have a database and you have a platform that actually shows the actual same type of information that I shared with you guys at the very beginning of the presentation, that actually showed all of those test results. And from there, you can actually drill down specific to your classroom, and what your needs are for your students and how each individual student actually did in TELPAS. And so if that's an area where you feel a little bit more, you need more support and you need more guidance and you need like a professional development opportunity on, then of course, please raise that concern and that need to your SILT member. We will also utilize Edugens. That's where all of the scores for all of our students are housed. And so we know that that's where we're actually going to be going to be reviewing benchmark scores, unit scores, all of those sort of things are actually going to be seen there. And as we mentioned before, we're going to dig deep into those questions, see who missed what question. Was it a large group? Was it a small group? Because it could be that only one student missed it. And it's like, okay, well, one student really doesn't seem like that big of a deal. But if you have 10 kids, you have 15 kids, you have 20 students that missed the exact same question, that's where we need to see why. Is it a skill that we just didn't take that much time going over? And if it's costing us a certain amount of points on that standardized test, then maybe it is going to be worth actually addressing it in the classroom. So through our observations, we will have a checklist that will be provided with those 7 steps. But as we mentioned before, we're only starting with the first 3 first. Our observations will only be about 15 minutes long, and then you guys will have a chance to actually jot down some other feedback, some other notes on the bottom. As we mentioned before, through those notes, we will be able to capture trends. We will be able to capture a lot of other additional pieces. But RTI is also an intervention tool where as teachers, we can provide during a lesson to keep students from failing behind. So we will need to ask students, utilize informative assessment opportunities in the classroom to see who's capturing what. It's a quick way, we know, to see if students are capturing the content as we're moving along through the lesson. So that way you don't have to wait until that unit exam. You don't have to wait until that benchmark exam. I can quickly see if my students are capturing what I am saying, or if it's something that I need to go ahead and nip it in the bud right there and then. And so we utilize those different types of data to actually help us address in our instructional processes. Let's see. After our observations with our team, it will be really important. We mentioned for the SILT to talk to the admin, and the admin to actually bring back feedback to the SILT team. And again, this would be the time to actually address other additional needs if we need more PD and Edugens, how to actually evaluate data, how to actually look at data, how to understand our own data, and how to actually use our data because what we plan, when we actually create a lesson plan, we should be very strategic in what it is that we're teaching. And so, through our observations, through those benchmark results, through those unit test results, that is a moment to actually see and kind of look back at our lesson plans. Well, did I do a really great job at covering this question, this skill from this question? It's an opportunity also to see that, there's an instructional strategy that I saw so and so do really well in, and I would like for one of our coaches to kind of co-teach with me, or I would like for someone to actually model it in action, using one of my classes, so that way I can understand how I can actually incorporate that into the class. So this will be a perfect opportunity for you as our teachers to be getting that support that's specific to your needs. Again, it's how can we help you help our students? So we know that we are going to begin with getting training on the 7 steps. Um, from there, as we do walkthroughs and have those conversations in our PLCs, we will also be looking for other opportunities that of coaching that you guys might need. Of course, we're going to exhaust our resources here locally at the campus. Is it something that, excuse me, the team member from science can actually model for you? Is it something that one of our instructional coaches can actually co-teach with you? Then is it something that, a member from the district, their level of support, if they can come and actually teach a larger group of us on how to actually incorporate this best strategy? And then finally, if we need to bring a consultant to actually help us as a campus as a whole, actually learn a little bit more on. So that's what the different types of supports are actually going to look like. The role, I think we've already touched base on the role of the PLCs and SILT. I don't think that there's anything that we haven't addressed so far. It's also a time to actually see if we need additional supplementary activities or resources that we might have. And of course, we don't expect for you to remember all of this, through each of the steps, whether it's before observations or after observations or during observations. Your SILT members are there to help remind you of what is going to happen at each stage of that process. So, what is it that we're going to be focusing in on before we start to do walkthroughs? During your walkthroughs and after your walkthroughs and your PLCs. And they're going to be your instructional leaders to help guide you through grinding through your data, as well as the admin. We will also come into your PLCs and help show you something that we might have seen, so that way you don't have to do all the digging. So we will actually disaggregate it even further by your content. And then finally, you'll get to actually see that for your specific classes. So that way you can see and spot your own trends, so to speak. Another important part is, of course, to engage with our families. It's very important to communicate to them what is actually going on. And so we will be communicating information through newsletters, Facebook posts, and text messages. This is another reason why we're asking you guys to take pictures of our student sample work, so that way we can actually use those pictures of their work as they're working along to actually communicate that through these different um, avenues, so that way we have transparency and not only of what our game plan and what our vision is for this year, but also what it is that we've actually been able to capture throughout the year, and be able to continue to inform them of what we have done. And even within those newsletters, I think what would actually be beneficial to actually be more intentional with the speaking part. We saw those large numbers of students that had that beginner or intermediate level of speaking and pass is that we might have, here's a question of the week for your students. And their science classes, this is what they're going to this is what they have been working on. So a question to that you might want to ask them when they get home is, hey, tell me about, I heard you learned about DNA. Tell me about what are the different steps in the replication in DNA, that type of thing. I think that would help also continue those academic structures at home, even though we might not expect for all of our students to actually be doing this. But if we can at least get that one student, those two students, if we can actually start developing some sort of systematic culture where we're actually utilizing academic vocabulary and language, not just at school, but also at home, then that helps reinforce what we're actually already doing here on campus. And I think that would speak volumes, and I think that would be very impactful. I appreciate your time with me this evening, and here is my contact information if you would like to get in touch with me.